Welcome to today's webinar, Maintaining Balance as a Caregiver with Mindfulness and Self-Compassion. My name is Juliana Valencia. I am the supervisor for the Caregiver and Supportive Services Unit with Fairfax Area Agency on Aging. Before I introduce today's speaker, I will go over a few housekeeping items. This presentation is being recorded, and a link for the recording is going to be sent to all registrants a week from today. Also, there is a Q&A button where you can submit your questions. We are going to allocate a few minutes at the end of the presentation to address all the questions that you are going to send us. Lastly, there is going to be a brief survey as you signed out. If you could take a moment to fill out that survey, it will really help us because we can create programs that are relevant and important to you. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Alfie Wishart. Alfie is a therapist in Dallas, Texas, a licensed professional counselor, licensed chemical dependency, and a certified rehabilitation counselor. He's a certified teacher in mindfulness-based stress reduction and a trained teacher in mindfulness, in mindful self-compassion through the UC San Diego Medical School, a member of the International Mindfulness Teachers Association, and a longtime meditator. He is a founding teacher and board member of Dallas Center for Mindfulness and Compassion. Alfie believes that as the world in which we live becomes ever more stressful, our ability to maintain a healthy equilibrium becomes all the more urgent. Alfie, welcome and thank you so much for being here with us. We are definitely looking forward to your presentation. So if you could turn your camera and your mic on, that would be wonderful. And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and make you the presenter.
Okay. And so Juliana is there to make sure I press the right buttons. Okay, so I am the co-host now and I'll start the presentation. Okay. So welcome everybody. This is a topic which I love talking about, and particularly to caregivers. Being in the helping professions myself, it is an ever-present issue. How much do we give to others, and how do we care for ourselves in the process? We're very fortunate to have access to mindfulness, meditation, and compassion. People have been studying compassion now for since the 80s, and its effectiveness in clinical situations. And so we have a lot of tools at our disposal to deal with life's difficulties. So what is mindfulness?
Alfie, just a quick thing. Could you share your screen with us?
Oh, I'm not. Oh, good idea.
That's okay.
It is. Let me see. Okay. Okay. The share screen option is not. Wait a minute. You know, Juliana, we tried this just a moment ago, but I don't see the share screen option. Let's see.
If you don't see it,
There we go. There we go. I got it. I had to expand something. How's that?
That's perfect.
Okie dokie.
You just need to go to the slideshow and that'll be it.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. Okay, there we go. How's that, Juliana? Is that working?
That's great.
Okay, good. So we're very fortunate to have mindfulness and meditation practices at our disposal. And it's really the first time in the history of the world that we have science and spiritual traditions working together. So what we have is we have the subjective information from mindfulness and from many different traditions, and every major world religion has their own tradition in a mindfulness meditation. So we have that rich history, plus now we have thousands of studies of neuroscience, and to verify what's been said all along, but also to give us a lot of information about how the brain works. So we know more about what mindfulness is not than what mindfulness is. So we've all done things where, we leave the house and realize the garage door is still open, or we left the stove on, or we forgot something that we needed on the way. In other words, we weren't fully present when leaving the house. And I'll give you a couple of definitions of mindfulness here. This is from the Merriam-Webster Dictionary. The practice of maintaining a non-judgmental state of heightened or complete awareness of one's thoughts, emotions, or experiences on a moment-to-moment basis. One of the reasons I like this, and there's another one here given just a moment, but it's a non-judgmental state of simply being aware of what's going on inside. Father Thomas Keating, Keating, is one of my, he's been a practitioner of the Christian form of mindfulness meditation. He passed away a few years ago, but he uses the word interiority, how important it is to develop this sense of interiority. In other words, to be able to understand what's going on inside and be aware of what's going on inside. Now, this is from John Kabat-Zinn. Mindfulness is awareness that arises through paying attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally. And then I sometimes add, in the service of self-understanding and wisdom. And John Kabat-Zinn is a psychologist who in 1979 started the stress reduction clinic at the University of Massachusetts Medical School. And he's the one who started all this stuff. He started treating people with an 8-week program that he devised to help people get grounded in a mindfulness meditation. So why don't we give it a try? What I'd like to do is do a very short meditation, maybe just a few minutes, to give you kind of an idea of what we're talking about. And before we start, it's a very simple process. I'll be narrating, so it's not just silence. And it's not about clearing our mind. It's about becoming aware of what's going on inside. So in other words, if I'm going to ring a bell, and then we're going to settle down and turn our awareness inside. Now, your mind may be jumping all around, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, because that's what our minds are trained to do. That's oftentimes what we have to do all day long. So to just abruptly stop, sometimes it's not so easy. So whatever's going on inside, we notice. Now, when a thought comes up, the practice is, when a thought comes up, we recognize that the thought has arisen, and we release the thought, and we return to this present moment awareness. Now, we're used to, when thoughts come up, to struggling with them, trying to push them away, or make them better, or make them nice, or they're repulsive, or real pleasant, or whatever. We don't do any of that. And we're not trying to clear our mind. We're not trying to will ourselves into some sort of state. It's just basically, when a thought arises, letting it go and returning to the present moment. And some people liken that to thinking of thoughts as clouds or a leaf on the stream. So when thoughts arise, we just let them go. We don't engage with them at all. So we'll save the minions for later. So if you would find a comfortable position where you don't have to move any muscles at all to maintain your position comfortably. And if you're sitting in a chair, feet on the floor, and hands in a comfortable place, and we will begin. And just settling down, following the bell into silence. And becoming aware of the body as a whole. Just sitting. Allowing our thoughts and our emotions just float away as best we can. That everything up to this moment, letting that flutter away. And any thoughts about the future as well. And the moment a thought arises, simply recognizing it without criticism or judgment and letting it go. And returning to the stillness of the body. And noticing fully as you can the stillness. Even though the mind may continue to throw out thoughts, the body is still and quiet. And allowing ourselves as best we can to sink into this quiet, this interior space of stillness. For just these few moments, there's nothing else to do other than just be. And as thoughts, emotions arise, simply letting them pass on through. Staying as best you can, just sitting, just being. Nothing to fix. Nothing to do. Just sitting. Just being right here. And absorbing the feeling of this space as best you can. Allowing the body to savor this moment of stillness. And absorb it, so that in a moment when the bell rings again, you can bring this with you as we go about our day and come back to it at any time. And slowly returning to the flow of time. Knowing that in some way whatever it was we experienced in this few moments of quiet and stillness is there waiting for us whenever we turn our attention to it. So one of the things that we'll be talking about here shortly is what happens in the space of mindfulness and how important it is as a foundation for compassion. When we stop, when we interrupt the flow of thoughts, and we're just resting in the present moment, we have this wonderful non-judgmental space and a presence of mind. So what does that mean? It means that our whole brain is working. Because most of the time we're talking about we're not really running on what we're thinking, we're responding from old habits. We have habitual responses, and oftentimes in caregiving, we know exactly what to do, and we go do what it is we need to do. And sometimes we'll run across something that, is disturbing, or that we're not sure what to do, or somebody calls, or there's some sort of urgent need. Or sometimes our mind is just on fire for whatever reason. We wake up in the morning, we're thinking about too many things. So the hectic mind is something that we all deal with from time to time. Even the most experienced meditators, it takes between 12 and 20 minutes for the mind to really calm down, doing just what we were doing, but over and over and over again. But the good news is that it's possible to calm the mind.
Hi, Alfie. Sorry to interrupt. Would you mind just raising your voice a little bit more?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you.
Let me see if I can do that. Okay, is that better?
That's good.
Okay. So this is one of my favorite quotes. Viktor Frankl is a psychiatrist, and he made this profound discovery and brought it to psychology in about 1950. And he said, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space, we have the power of choice. In our choice lies our growth and our freedom. And what he's talking about, he made this radical discovery that he had the power to choose how he was going to respond to anything in his external environment. Didn't matter what it was, how beautiful or how awful it was, he could pause and decide how he was going to respond. That space is what we experienced a moment ago in mindfulness. Mindfulness helps us to develop that space because it's between the past and the future. It's just right now. And when we're in the present moment, we're not acting out of old patterns or habitual patterns. We actually have an opportunity to do something different. And we bring our whole mind and our whole brain online. Quick story, when my younger daughter was young, she was being a real pill, which she really knew how to do very well. And I was at a friend's house and she was throwing a fit. We couldn't get her to calm down. And so I just closed my eyes and said, I'm out of solutions here. So I closed my eyes, went into this space between stimulus and response, and said, what am I going to do? And so in that moment, the words ice cream came up. So I said to my friend, do you have any ice cream? And she said, yes. So I asked my daughter, would you like some ice cream? She said, yes. And everything was fine after that. And I would, I was out of options. So I couldn't think of anything else. So I had to pause. And in that space, this sort of notion arose, and it was really exactly what was needed in this situation. And I've used that many, many times working with clients or, in a variety of situations, and something is unexpected, you arrive and the order's not ready or whatever it may be. But this is perhaps I consider one of the most valuable things tools we have in this human life, because much of the time we are really just acting from habitual patterns. And when that's a problem and we don't know what to do, instead of trying to figure it out and sort of piece things together, when we just stop and we go to this space that Viktor Frankl talks about. And he learned this under dire circumstances. He was in Auschwitz and Dachau for 2.5 years. And very early on, he knew if he had to survive, if he was going to survive, he had to figure something out. And this is one of his great discoveries. And it's extremely useful. So, and also the poet Rumi says it quite plainly as well. The quieter you become, the more you are able to hear. So simple. And particularly work as a caregiver, we're attentive to the other person's needs. And sometimes we really need to be attentive to things that the person for whom we're caring isn't even aware of. So we have to be open to whatever's going on with this person in a manner that really is fully aware, and not just making assumptions of, oh, because of this it's going to be okay, or because of that it's going to be okay. We need to be sensitive to whatever's going on, whatever shifts are going on. And so when we're quiet inside, we become much more sensitive to what's going on around us. So the benefits of mindfulness, the short list, it's a very long list. There's over 5,000 studies been done on mindfulness and neuroscience. Lowers baseline anxiety, increases a sense of well-being, calms and steadies the mind, fosters better decision-making, and most importantly, makes being compassionate more accessible. Because when we are anxious, it actually decreases the functioning of our neocortex, where all the executive decisions are made. So the more anxious we become, the less we're able to access this creative decision-making process and intuitively know what to do next. So it's really, when it's taught in any of the contemplative traditions, contemplative Christianity and Islam and Buddhism and Judaism, and the mindfulness is taught first in order to calm and steady the mind. Because if our mind is jumping all around, it's very difficult to be compassionate. You know, we're worried about 9 different things, and what in front of us is kind of a problem, and we get all twisted up on our own thoughts. So when we're able to maintain this moment by moment awareness, things go much more smoothly. There's a wonderful history of mindfulness at this, and the slides will be available, and you can access this rather than me going into a long history of MBSR. So coming to compassion. Now I put the word there, compassion, in small letters, sort of intuitively, because it's such a huge topic. I thought sort of putting it small is kind of a nice emphasis. But I want to show a quick 3-minute video that talks about the relationship of mindfulness and compassion and how they serve each other. I'm going to enlarge this so you can see this. And the slide that's up right now is the translation, because it goes by really fast. And so I wrote out the translation also.
Whoever watch, one thing I will say, more easy words, whatever believer we are, we need to live moment by moment happily and kindly. How to do that? We need to keep our mind moment by moment, calm is possible, kind is possible, clear is possible. No calm, no kind, no clear. Okay, thank you, bye-bye.
So very, very simple instructions. hard to do, but very simple instructions. And so what he said basically is whoever's watching, he will say in the most succinct and easy words as possible. And whatever believer we are, meaning whatever tradition, whatever or no tradition or whatever religion or non-religion, we need to live moment by moment happily and kindly. So, sorry. Okay, so if the mind is not calm, the mind's not kind. If the mind's not kind, the mind's not clear. And so when we're working as a caregiver, this is really what we need to do. Calm, kind, clear mind, so that we can be attentive to the needs at hand and be effective in what we do. So I'm going to do a short loving kindness meditation. Loving kindness, I'll be talking about in a minute. Loving kindness is sort of sits in between empathy and compassion, and I'll go back into that. But one of the things that we most need as caregivers, the missing element seems to be the ability to know when we need the loving compassion. We oftentimes go over push the envelope to the edge and go over sometimes in caring for others. And so a loving kindness meditation can be very helpful. So again, this will only take a couple minutes. The process is that I will say 4 phrases in succession and leave a little bit of time after each phrase for you to say the phrase, to repeat the phrase to yourself silently. We'll only go through it once because we're limited on time. And I'll talk a little bit about that afterwards. So if you would settle down just for a moment. And remember that space of quiet and stillness that we experienced earlier. And we'll begin.
Alfie, I think,
Yeah.
were you ringing your bell?
Yes.
For whatever reason, the sound is not coming through.
Ah. Well, heck. Well, the bell's ringing, so.
Thank you.
Thanks. So settling down into the stillness and the quiet that we experienced earlier. And just settling down for the moment. And I'll begin with the phrases. May I be free from inner and outer harm. I'm repeating silently. May I be happy and contented. May I be healthy and whole to whatever degree possible. May I live with ease of well-being. Allowing the meaning of these words to settle in. And perhaps getting a sense of how sometimes during a stressful day, how these words could be helpful. Or when we feel we've hit the end of our ability to care for others, how this might be helpful. So, in coming back to the presentation, I want to touch on something briefly, the difference between sympathy, empathy, and compassion, and the role that where loving kindness fits into that. Sympathy, feeling of pity or sorrow for the distress of another, commiseration, synonymous with pity. Sorry, there's so much functionality built into things. I don't know how this does this. Amazing. Yeah, I just moved the cursor. Okay, so so it's the least connected of all of the words related to caring for others. It's that person over there, that poor person over there. Empathy is often used synonymously with compassion, but it's very, very different. The research on it is quite clear. It's the ability to identify with or understand the perspective, experience, or motivations of another individual, and to comprehend and share another individual's emotional state, which means that the other person's in a state of suffering or grief of some sort or whatever they're experiencing, and we're sharing that emotional state with them. And one of the reasons why the outcome is not good is because now you have two people suffering, same problem. So, and this is something in counseling and therapy, we have to be very careful. We have to be able to connect with others and know exactly what's going on with them, but also have a different perspective. Our perspective is, how can I help and what can I do in this situation, and not just be there with them only in the experience of the emotion. So loving kindness is defined as tender and benevolent affection. And and this is sort of in between empathy and compassion. It's not quite compassion, but it's much more connected than empathy is. Because it's a desire to really do something in some way, if possible, to help the other person. So, compassion, sympathetic consciousness of others' distress, together with a desire to alleviate it. And this is what separates compassion from the other emotions that are concerned with altruistic emotions. That it's the desire to alleviate the suffering of the other person. Now, the Dalai Lama has suggested that compassion is an attitude that not only wishes for others to be free of their suffering, but is also associated with a sense of commitment, responsibility, and respect towards the other. So it goes into a little bit greater depth, because when in the mode of compassion, we're willing to do whatever it takes to help the other person. And we often make that our profession, or if it's a family member that we're caring for, where it's a really great gift to be able to care for the other. Paul Gilbert is a researcher in England and psychologist, and he started studying compassion in the early 90s. And he said there's three modes of compassion. There's giving compassion to others, receiving compassion from others, and giving compassion to oneself. Now, the last one, giving compassion to oneself, is the one that we seem to forget about most easily. I mean, how often have we been in a caregiver position and just going like, I just can't do this anymore. I want to, I got 2 hours left on my shift or whatever it is, and I just can't do it. And sometimes we are the last person to give compassion to. So this brings us to a really important point, is that self-compassion is necessary if we're to be a caregiver, because what we're really doing is we're caring for the vehicle of caring ourselves in a manner that allows us to sustain our caregiving efforts. One way to put it, I was talking about this with a friend, and she says, we have to give from our overflow. But so often we don't give from our overflow, and our tank is empty and we get burnt out. And that's avoidable. Well, how do we do that? We have, with the self-awareness that comes with mindfulness and the mode of compassion, of giving compassion to ourselves, together will let us know when we're at the point where we really need something. We need to fill our tank, or we need to take a break, or we need to do something to replenish our own reservoirs. So mindful self-compassion is a set of practices created in 2010, and is a 8-week program. And so what I suggest is, there was a study done, a really intelligent guy asked the question, are there compassionate gestures in primates, humans and primates? And there's very definitely compassionate gestures. And there are 3 things that demonstrated compassion from one to another. One was compassionate gesture. The other is compassionate phrases, meaning speaking to somebody in a compassionate tone. And the other is physical warmth. Of the 3 modes of communicating compassion to another. Now, the self-compassion break is something that can be very useful. It's really akin to what I was talking about earlier with the taking a break, finding that space between stimulus and response. And for instance, in the middle of things, you may say, well, I'm not feeling so good. What's going on? And you take a step back and you find your compassionate gestures and compassionate phrases, which are things that, whatever it may be, putting a hand over your heart, or holding your own hands, or holding your head in your hands, or just rubbing your arms or something like that, to signal the fact that you're caring about yourself. And you're and the compassionate phrases can be very helpful, like, this is really difficult. You're doing okay, that this is a very difficult situation. And so when we pause and we use these gestures and phrases in sort of this self-compassion break, we can get to know how much more we can do, or if we need to take a break, or what we need in that moment in order to bring ourselves back into balance. So it's about learning to be compassionate with oneself. This is a task that when I became familiar with this, got the trainings and all, I thought, well, that should be easy. But I found out that most people really don't know how to be compassionate with oneself or themselves. It seems selfish, or it seems like you're letting yourself off the hook. There's a lot of reasons why people sort of resist this, or a fear of compassion. That's what things that Paul Gilbert discovered. So there's a number of reasons why there are obstacles to being compassionate to oneself. And I'm speaking from clients that I've had. Sometimes there's an overarching sense of responsibility, meaning taking on the other person's burdens as a sense of honor and duty, to the point where one is completely worn out. It can be a sense of feeling that as a means of getting love from others, or getting a feeling that one is doing good and doing well in the world to help others. But our notions about ourselves are not really up to the task. So we will push ourselves beyond the point of reasonableness, or sometimes we just have a misplaced sense of duty. And oftentimes with families that I've worked with, or working with a family member, how important it is to know the line between what family can do and what is needed from professional care. And there's a lot of emotions wrapped up in that, of wanting to be supportive of a family member and be there for the family member, but sometimes the professional folks need to take over, and the family take a supportive role rather than the primary role. But if we keep pushing ourselves beyond beyond our capacity to serve, then we're the ones who are suffering along with the person for whom we're caring, and that's to be avoided. It's unnecessary. We're much more capable. We're much more effective at helping other people when we're taking care of ourselves. Is really what it comes down to be. So we're almost at the quarter hour, so I want to give you all some references here. John Kabat-Zinn, who started all this in 1979, that's his website, and the University of Massachusetts website on mindfulness. And these are some apps. This is John Kabat-Zinn's app, the Mindfulness Coach, which was created by the Veterans Administration, which is really good. The VA has been using mindfulness for PTSD for a long time now. And Thich Nhat Hanh, which is he's passed on now, but he's a well-known Vietnamese monk, rather extraordinary guy. But I put him in there because more than anyone else I've run into, except for perhaps Thomas Keating, mindfulness and compassion are a unity. They're not separable with him. His wonderful teachings and meditations. So Paul Gilbert, who I mentioned briefly, he created the system of compassion-focused therapy, and his research is just extensive and wonderful. He's got a lot of information on his website. Paul Ekman has some wonderful information on compassion, the use of compassion. He's the fellow who discovered that there's universal emotions, that emotions are not just come from our culture or culture bound, but they're actually universal emotions that we all have. And he's got some great information on compassion and the evolutionary basis and utility of compassion. In other words, one could say without compassion, we're doomed, which is accurate. And so it's kind of, we're at a similar turning point right now. So compassion in my mind is really mindfulness and compassion. Compassion is necessary for our survival, really, in these days and times. So how to start a mindfulness practice? What I recommend is starting 3 minutes twice a day, and it helps to find a place that's comfortable where you can go at any time and do your meditation. And then find a narration that seems to fit you best. All the meditation teachers have their own sort of narration. John Kabat-Zinn has his, and I have mine. And so what I suggest is finding these resources and seeing which ones seem to fit the best for you. But just sit for 3 minutes twice a day, but sit every day. And the reason why that's important is that regularity is much more important than the duration. because when we sit every day, it becomes a habit, becomes part of our daily life. And once we have the habit, we can add time as we have time. Or if we don't have time, we can just still sit for 3 minutes. And we naturally gravitate toward this wonderful space of mindfulness and compassion, because after a while, the mindfulness and compassion are really one and the same. In other words, when it's a busy day and our minds are going and going, we sit and meditate, we sit and quiet ourselves down, that itself is an act of compassion. So the self-compassion materials, Chris Germer and Kristen Neff. Chris Germer is a psychologist, and Kristen Neff is a researcher at the University of Texas at Austin. And they put together an 8-week program and some other programs for self-compassion. Now, for compassion exercises, the Center for Mindfulness and Self-Compassion is SCMC in California, associated with the University of San Diego, UC San Diego, created an offering called the Circles of Practice, and they have a mindfulness teacher do a mindfulness exercise, a self-compassion exercise for about 45 minutes, and 3 sessions a day, 7 days a week. And I learned about them, and I've been doing a presentation every week for a long time now. And depending on who is doing it and what time it is, the ones that I do, I have 60, 70, 80 people, and many of them from Europe and Canada and other places, Croatia, what have you. So it's really wonderful. There's people worldwide really getting to recognize the importance of compassion. So that is this is the link that'll take you to the registration page. They don't charge a fee for it. They do ask for a donation, but it's pretty simple, and you can learn these self-compassion exercises and with other people that are doing the same thing. It's really quite wonderful. So Dallas Center for Mindfulness and Self-Compassion, I'm doing a mindfulness and compassion modular offering. It's it's a weekly program, and it teaches both mindfulness and self-compassion side by side, which is unusual. Usually it's one or the other, but I found that self-compassion is easier to do, goes much better when we have a mindfulness background. So those will be recorded, so somebody can come in at any point. If they miss some things or they have to miss a week, then they can come back and go through the recordings and such. So it's it's kind of very flexible format. And all of nature knows how to meditate. The trees know how to meditate, the rocks know how to meditate, the clouds know how to meditate. And we're just catching on. And some of our fellow creatures also know how to meditate. And this is one of my favorite pictures of meditation. So may you meditate like a frog on a leaf in a still pond. So I hope you all have enjoyed this. This is my contact information, the Dallas CMC, my website, which has some meditations, and on my website, I'll often have an introduction to that general kind of meditation that we'll be doing. So there's lots of resources available. So I hope you've enjoyed that. I've certainly enjoyed presenting with you all. And I guess we're going back now to Juliana. So I'm going.
Thank you so much. That was such a wonderful presentation and great tools, really, that we can all use at any point in our lives or in every day. Like you said, creating that practice, so important. And we do have a couple of questions from the audience. And I wanted to begin with one question. But before I do that, I want to invite everyone in our audience to please submit your questions through the Q&A so that we can have a conversation with Alfie. So if there's any concerns or anything that you want to know about these practices, please feel free to submit your questions and I will read them to our speaker. So the first question that I have for you is the difference between mindfulness and meditation. It does seem that we use that interchangeably, those two words, but they aren't necessarily the same. So could you
Sure.
could you talk about that?
Sure. Yeah, there are many different forms of meditation. There's guided meditations, there's meditation on scripture, there's meditations on divine qualities like compassion or, on spiritual figures. There's lots and lots of different kinds of meditations. The mindfulness meditation we talked about today is, I first became familiar with it through Jon Kabat-Zinn. And it was, this is also sometimes called a non-dual or non-figurative or non-objective meditation. In other words, we're not meditating on anything. It's not a concentration meditation. It's not, we're just training our mind to be aware of thoughts as they arise and let them go and come back to the present moment. Now that, and then I got training in centering prayer, which is the Christian form of a mindfulness meditation. It's been around since the 1st or 2nd century. And it was, I was amazed it was exactly the same as what Jon Kabat-Zinn was doing. And so I did my research and found out that this particular form of meditation, what we're calling a mindfulness meditation, is present in Christianity and Judaism and Hinduism, Buddhism. It's universal. So when I say mindfulness meditation, it refers to this specific kind of meditation, which is it's a non-objective meditation. It's about just being in the present moment as best we can without judgment or criticism.
Thank you so much. So with that in mind, my next question from the audience is, I'm wondering if the limiting phrases in the loving kindness meditation defeat the purpose of the meditation. I found the limiting phrases an obstacle to quieting the mind. For example, the inner and outer, and to whatever degree is possible.
Yeah. Yeah, the loving kindness meditation is not about stilling the mind. The loving kindness meditation is to develop a sense of caring toward oneself and others. Some of the folks that I work with, because this is a big topic, because when talking about compassion, there are we have a lot of conscious and unconscious obstacles to practicing compassion. Like we think of, well, it's wimpy, or it's self-indulgent, or or that it's kind of frou-frou, or we're letting somebody off the hook for what they did. There's all these sort of misgivings about compassion. And love, or somebody has such a strongly negative view of themselves, they can't even begin to do compassion. They just can't do it. So what I do is that if they can, to start with a loving kindness meditation, because at least we can learn how to be kind to ourselves. It's easier than this big notion of compassion. And so when we stop and we're just kind to ourselves, things begin to improve, and we develop this sense of safety around the practices. The unfortunate thing is that, well, we tend to have a very negative inner narrative, and most of the time we're engaged in the world, we're not really all that aware of it, but as soon as we make a mistake, or we forget something, or we bump our toe, or whatever it is, this negative narration kicks right in. Oh, I'm stupid. I can't believe I did that again. This knucklehead, or blah, blah, blah. We go on, and all of that is completely unnecessary. That a huge part of the world doesn't even know what that is. And this negative narration can be really quite problematic. And so the loving kindness meditation is a way of beginning to change that from a negative narrative into a positive narrative. And the same thing with the self-compassion break. So when we do something, we're having a bit of a shame attack about something, we can pause and begin to give ourselves some compassion, and to approach the situation without judgment or criticism. So slowly over time, we begin to change that negative narrative into, oh man, Yep, I screwed up. Okay, what can I do about this? Okay, I know how I need to call. And we just take care of it without this cascade of self-recrimination and stuff. So that's the difference there. And loving kindness meditation helps get the wheels started.
That makes sense. Thank you. One question that I have for you, and then we'll turn to our audience. I have a couple of questions from the audience as well. So that during the past 2 years, there has been an increase in anxiety and depression in family caregivers, older adults, and really the entire community. Could you talk about the relationship or effects on that mindfulness has when dealing with negative thoughts or emotions?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you're interested, the American Psychological Association, the APA, does a survey every year of stress in America, called Stress in America with the year on it. And just keeps going up, with finances and and what's going on in the Eastern Europe. We have good reason to be anxious. In the MRI studies, functional MRI studies, and there's been studies done on people who've taken the 8-week course, the MBSR course. And at the end of the MBSR course, the brain structures are actually different. Like the amygdala is like the alarm bell. Then when the amygdala goes off, that's where it generates anxiety and this sense of threat. That's actually downregulated. It's smaller actually in participants. And the prefrontal cortex, which is where executive decisions are made, we get signals from all over the body to go through this channel called this prefrontal cortex, is where we call it executive decision making, because in complex situations we need abstract reasoning and creative reasoning, and so that's actually larger. So with meditation we become generally more relaxed, and we can become better at problem solving. Now when we're more relaxed, we're able to bring the neocortex more online. We're more able to say, wow, I don't know what to do here. Oh, I know the solution. Ice cream. That's what I need to do. And
I love that. And I'm going to utilize that with my daughter. Thank you. So the next question says, shouldn't compassion be an empathetic consciousness versus a sympathetic consciousness?
Well, I think the question points to the difference between sympathy and empathy. And I think of a continuum starting with at 0 indifference. And then sympathy is sort of the first move toward someone else's, an awareness of somebody else's suffering, but it's still over there. And in Texas, we have this phrase, "Oh, you poor dear." It's kind of like, and they go back to their lunch, And then the next is empathy. But again, empathy is simply a resonance with the other person's emotional state. It's a connection to and a synonymous experience of the other person's emotional state. So now we're suffering just as much as they are. And the research on that is that the outcome is not good for caregivers or anybody else. Empathy is really just sharing the other person's problem, thinking that somehow we're relieving the other person by sharing their suffering, but it doesn't work like that. We start suffering just the same way they are. And so, I said, I look at loving kindness, excuse me, as a bridge between empathy and compassion. Loving kindness is just being kind to somebody. Like if you're with your child and the ice cream falls out of the cone, the kind thing to do is say, here's my cone. or you're feeling hungry, let's go get something to eat. Or somebody's upset about something and said, do you need some space? Yeah. Okay. And it's just being kind to someone. Like if you have a child that's got, a fever and there's nothing you can do, you've given them all the medication and they're just kind of miserable. And you just be kind to them, read them a book or get them a drink of water or whatever you need to do. And compassion is a much larger arena. It's not only personal in terms of its utility with caregiving and maintaining a balance between our needs and the needs of the other person, but it's also has global implications. When we talk about the environmental situation, that's a situation of compassion. I mean, we're all, it's compassion for the planet, compassion for the birds, compassion for us human beings in our own eco environment. When we're talking about politics, it often doesn't enter into politics, but when we get to when it does, we're saying, what is the most compassionate thing to do here? And that really changes our perspective on things. So compassion has a much wider implication in terms of not only our personal lives, because we can take a look at when we start working with compassion, one of the things that comes up is we get to realize all the times we hadn't been compassionate with ourselves. And we need to, before we get there, we have to build up the practices so we can be able to contain those kinds of really strong emotions. So compassion has a much larger context and much larger implication, all the way from the intense personal to the macro, which is humanity. Because it looks like we may be facing a decision in evolution, whether or not the human race is going to survive. And that's really, I don't want to be too dramatic there, but that seems to be what's going on. And compassion is the answer. And I hope I answered the question.
I think so. Thank you. It sounds so, it sounds easy, and you said this before, but really developing that practice of being compassionate towards the self can be very, very challenging, because if we don't pay attention, if we don't become aware of the voices that we have in our heads, that are driving a lot of the times, a lot of the actions and decisions, if not all the time, that, it's hard to be compassionate towards the self. So the next question that we have from the audience is, how does a person get to the awareness for the need for professional help versus the duty of family to take care of the loved one?
Oh, that's a really good question. It's hard to do because we have a lot of emotion, a lot of relationship built up with the person for whom we're caring. And we want to do everything, and we would like to do everything because that person deserves us to give them everything. However, most of the time, families go too far, and it has to get really difficult before they say, I can't do this anymore. So my suggestion is to think about what the next stage would be like. This person moves from the stage they're at, which you can handle, it's doable. What is the next stage? And do you really want to do that? And what about the stage after that? Are you really capable emotionally of handling that? Or is that really a professional job for a professional? And it's complicated by our relationship with our family. Sometimes the relationship wasn't that good and we feel, or we weren't good to them, and so we feel we owe them, and so we're likely to go overboard, or just this sense of duty, family is everything and that sort of thing. But it's nothing noble in burning ourselves out. If the person would better benefit from professional care at a certain point, that is the compassionate thing to do, both for them and for you. And so it'd be wise to talk to professionals who would, whether it's hospice care or home health or whatever it is, to talk to them and tell them about the situation and get their advice. Say, at what point, I mean, I can do this, this, and this, and I want to do as much as I can, but what are your thoughts on this? And get a professional input. And they say, well, it's not really time yet. I mean, you're doing okay, and you're going to be okay. When it gets to this point, when you start to see this happening, give us a call. Because it's really important to be really, really clear where that line is.
Thank you. And we are past the hour. So I just wanted to let everyone know you are welcome to stay a few extra minutes. Alfie will continue to answer a couple more questions. And I have one more question for you, and it has to do with the family dynamics. We know that they can be very complex and complicated, especially for caregivers who become decision makers for their loved ones. Could you give us a few tips or mindfulness tips to handle some of those situations, especially when the caregiver finds themselves in that situation? How can they navigate or be more mindful?
Yeah. Well, pausing is the key. How many times I've worked with somebody and they were going along, things are they're doing their best, and then the patient, because of whatever reason, they're really mean. They get like, they get really critical or something. And it's like, what I got to do about this? I need the help, and they don't. Pause. And just pause and say, hang on, I got to pause right here. I'll be right back. If you can. And just go and sit in the other room and just exhale and take care of yourself and breathe and give yourself some self-compassion and just say, okay, what's needed here? I'm at the breaking point. I need to, how do I deal with this? How do I deal with this? And the more calm we get, the more kind we get, and the more clear our mind is about making a decision of what the next right thing is to do. And sometimes, well, the creative solutions come out of the air, so to speak. And that's one of the reasons I played that video, is because if the mind's not calm, it can't be kind. If it's not kind, it can't be clear. And we can't, meaning that our mind gets muddled and we can't make a good decision. So the number one thing is to pause and settle down and bring the whole brain back online. Because when we're just reacting, we're not using our whole brain. We're running off of habitual patterns. So when we stop, we interrupt those habitual patterns and allow space for a creative solution. And that's a really important thing. We've got to just kind of pause. Because when we feel burned out, that's when we start running off of habitual patterns, and we get antsy and we get negative and we try to control it and all that stuff that doesn't work.
Thank you. We need ice cream at that point, right?
Good to have some ice cream on hand.
Right. So the next question that comes from the audience is mindfulness designed to help us take advantage of the space and prime us for a higher probability for a positive response, whatever the stimulus? Is that how mindfulness works neurologically?
What was that last part of that sentence?
It says, it's mindfulness designed to help us take advantage of the space and prime us for a higher probability for a positive response, whatever the stimulus.
Yes.
And then the next question is that how mindfulness works neurologically?
Yes. Because we have the way our mind works. See, we work by routines. We have all these routines. We see our car, we unlock the car, we get in the car, we start the car, we drive our car, we know where we're going, we can drive almost blindfolded to where we work. And the mind does that in order to be more efficient. In other words, we don't have to learn it all over again every time. So we develop these routines, but we also develop emotional routines. And so there we go. Okay. So you changed it. So in order to get to solutions that we don't have a solution for, we only have two options. One is we could use the top-down method, which is trying to figure it out and logically and ask a bunch of questions and trying to figure it out. And the other is the bottom up, which is we sort of get quiet and check in, interrupt the habitual patterns and say, okay, I need a new solution here, but I don't know what it is. And then we'll get an intuitive lead or intuitive feel, or a thought will pop up and we go, okay, well, that sounds reasonable. Let me try that, see how that works. And 9 times out of 10, it works really well. But it's when we're trying to figure it out. Well, if I do this and then I can do that, and maybe if I do this and that'll do that, and, you know, and that really just drives us crazy. It just creates more anxiety. It's when we calm down that we can bring all of our faculties online, because we're in our habitual patterns, not really thinking. We don't have to, because it's just like an algorithm. It goes into motion and we react in a certain way. A lot of times with physicians or, you know, in any situations, one of the things we have to be careful with in counseling. Oh, I know what's going on with that client. You know, no, we don't. You know, so we have to wait and see and ask questions and find out what's going on and proceed that way, rather than make any assumptions about the situation.
Yeah, very important. So my last question, is it correct to see mindfulness as an attitude and meditation as a technique?
That's a very interesting question, because I think they're both. You know, the process is, for the general attitude, is the meditation itself. Because what happens when in a regular practice and somebody's practicing mindfulness, that space that we talked about during the meditation gets bigger. And eventually it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, so that we tend to live more in that space than not. So that becomes our general orientation to life, rather than just bopping around and trying to figure things out. So we tend to live more in this space, particularly so that when somebody, for instance, if somebody's really busy, they have a busy schedule and a good schedule, but doable, that if the mindful approach is that when I'm doing this segment from 9 to 9:30, when I'm doing this, all I'm doing is 9 to 9:30. And at 9:30, I'm doing something else. And then I'm doing 9:30 to 10 o'clock. And let's say between 9:30 and 9:45, I get a call, something urgent. So I stop doing what I was doing at 9:30, and I'm focused 100% on that call. And when I'm done 100% with that call, then I go back 100% to what I was doing before. And what that does is it prevents this muddle from happening, where we have all this stuff on our mind all the time. So our mind's not jumping around from one thing to another. And another thing, important point, is there's been some wonderful studies done on multitasking, and they found out that only 2.5% of the population can multitask, which means they can listen to 3 symphonies at a time and track each one. That's multitasking. What we do that we call multitasking, we're just burning our brains out with successive, rapid attention to different things. I'll pay attention to this and to that and to this and that, and this is going on all the time, right? So our awareness is just fractured all over the place. And so in the mindfulness mode, we don't do that. We don't, you know, if something comes up where we think, well, oh, I forgot about that. But we don't try to do 2 things at once. So, okay, put it on a notepad, continue 100% with what I'm doing. When I'm finished that, then I'll do that. So that's especially helpful when, let's say, particularly as a caregiver, when we put in a lot of effort and we leave, we're still sort of in the mode of being a caregiver. and we still have the effects of the caregiving with us. With a mindfulness state, let's call it, or approach, mindfulness mindset, when we leave, we're done. And we go 100% on to whatever else we're going to do. Go have dinner with friends, or spend time with family, or just read a book, or whatever. We're done. And so we're not burning up all this other energy thinking of 10, 12, 15 different things at the same time. Or we're sitting there wondering, oh, geez, they need their whatever. It's like, no, well, I'm not there. You know what I mean? We're not wrapped up in all these things we don't really need to be thinking about at the time. So we decrease the amount of energy that we're burning, and we're much better able to enjoy life and regenerate and refresh ourselves when we're just doing whatever it is that's right in front of us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This has been such a wonderful presentation, very, very insightful and very helpful for those family caregivers who are struggling with stress and just finding balance in their lives through that journey that really, as they move forward, it becomes more and more in terms of the responsibilities that they have to take to help their loved ones. Thank you so much, Alfie, for sharing your knowledge, for sharing your time with us, and for your willingness to answer all of our questions. Very insightful. Thank you.
You're welcome, Juliana. Thank you for the opportunity to do this. Really appreciate it.
Yes. And also to our audience, thank you so much for making the space to be with us today. We appreciate your time, and we appreciate that you are taking this time to learn about mindfulness and self-compassion. As you signed out, there is going to be a brief survey. If you could take a moment to answer those questions, that will be very, very helpful to us. We read all of your comments, and if there is anything that you want to share with our speaker today, please make sure you send us that, you include that in your survey. Also, I want to invite you to our next presentation on Friday, April 14, which will be on the wellness of the heart. We will have Dr. Akil Taher, who is a big proponent and advocate of plant-based diet. So it'll be a very interesting presentation, and I hope you can join us then, and have a good afternoon, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.